You know, right. Nick Durst here with Joe Calabrese. And Joe, it is football season, so we got to bring in an insider here. And I'm very excited about our guest today.
Yes, he was a little hard to get at first, but we were able to track him down. I'm very happy to have him on. Currently, he's been working at SNY covering the Giants for the better part of 10 years. He's written two books, one about Eli Manning, the making of a quarterback, and one on Michael Strahan. And he is a graduate of Q's. So we got another Q's grad on, and obviously we're gone right on down the SNY list. So very happy and excited to have him on this morning. Mr. Ralph Vacchiano. Ralph, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm good, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Appreciate it. So, Ralph, we want to talk about you, but real quick here. Are you getting tired of covering all these Jets unsigned rookie quarterbacks every few years and constant coaching searches and general manager searches?
I don't mind the rookie quarterback so much, but it has been a really bad cycle for both these teams of head coach searches, general manager searches, and they're just the worst to have to cover. So, it also comes with losing. I mean, over the last 5 years, I have not seen a lot of good football, and that's getting tiresome.
Yeah, we'll certainly get into all that, but first want to start with you here. Growing up, you're a big sports fan. You're in the local area here in New York, so you got all the teams. When did you decide, hey, maybe I want to pursue a career potentially working in sports journalism?
Pretty early. Honestly, as soon as I realized I was never going to be the center fielder for the Mets, which had to be like when I was 9 or 10 years old, I decided I wanted to be around it somehow. I was kind of the geeky kid that I'd go to Shea Stadium, the old Shea Stadium, and, look up at the press box and think, all right, I'm going to be there someday. That was sort of my dream from a pretty young age. And I don't think I really thought about it seriously until pardon me a second, my earpiece is popping out here. I don't think I thought about it seriously probably until I was, I guess, in junior high school, and I started writing for the school paper and stuff like that. That's when I really started pursuing it. But pretty early on, sports was my love, and I knew I wanted to be around it somehow.
All right, so you mentioned the Mets.
Yeah.
What is going on with this franchise? I don't know. I feel like they're now a Mets fan as well. I feel like they're just making all the wrong moves in all the wrong places. DeGrom was looking like the MVP. He's shut down. Maybe Syndergaard's coming back as a long reliever. Your take on this new regime, which really isn't too new because Sandy Alderson's back to business, do what he always does.
Yeah, I don't know that I have a problem with most of the moves that they made individually. I think they were killed by injuries this year, and I hate to use that as an excuse, but it's kind of reality for them. They held on longer than I thought they would when they were, running out guys I never heard of in the starting lineup for most of the year, and that was pretty impressive. I'm a little surprised that, the guys like Pete Alonso and Michael Conforto, when they came back, weren't necessarily hitting right off the bat. But, I think injuries have killed them. I think if you, put Jake DeGrom into that lineup, every fifth day for most of the season, they might have gotten through this tough stretch. I still have hope. As bad as it's been, what are they, within a game of first place? So
they're a game out, actually.
Yeah, I haven't given up.
That up.
The injuries, though, that's an old story with them. I don't have an answer to that. I've seen that with football teams as well, and people want to blame the trainers or the program. Well, sometimes it's just bad luck, and Mets fans know we get a lot of bad luck.
Certainly, no doubt about it. So Nick is the Giants and Mets fan, and I am the Yankees and Jets fan. So we kind of balance each other out here. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you're probably maybe going to take a little more of a taking to him with the Mets and the Giants stuff. But so we want to get back to you.
Okay.
You went to Syracuse, one of the best schools for broadcast journalism, obviously, in the country. It's got a very rich list of former alum.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you wrote for your school paper starting in junior high, which is a little young, but you had the chops there for it very, very early. So you went to Syracuse. Did you go specifically with that intention in mind that you wanted to do broadcast journalism? And when you were there, what kind of internships or stuff did you do on campus that helped you?
Well, it's interesting. I went there for journalism, not sure whether I wanted to do newspaper or broadcast journalism. And, I don't know if it's still the same at Syracuse, but at that time they split it. and you either did broadcast or you did newspaper. There was no crossover, which honestly is a terrible way, as we look at it now, to go about it. You need to do pretty much everything. But my freshman year, I went to a meeting of the famous radio station WAER there, and I listened to their speech, and they basically said, you'd work behind the scenes for 3 years, you'd write copy for people, and then maybe you're in a room of like 30 people, maybe 3 of you will be our broadcast team as a senior. And I thought, well, those aren't really good odds, and that's 3 years of doing stuff I don't want to do. Let me try the newspaper. And I went over there, and after about 5 minutes there, they said to me, do you want to cover basketball recruiting? Like, I'm in. So I focused just on that. And I didn't do, other than an occasional guest appearance on the radio or their then fledgling TV station, I didn't do any broadcast at all at Syracuse. I was all newspaper. It was a singular focus through school.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned it was split off, because now, and you're a prime example, everyone does everything. It's so mixed, and with digital media platforms, just in general, and your thoughts, how have things changed as far as just purely writing goes from when you first started to now, where you're writing digitally?
Yeah, it's insane, and it's so much different than when I started. And honestly, and I kind of get mad at Syracuse for this, but I don't think they knew, obviously, can't predict the future. Everything I was taught at Syracuse was obsolete within about 5 or 6 years of my career. It was, you write for a newspaper. Here's your ruler and your wheel to lay out pages on a piece of paper. And, within a couple of years, everything was by computer. I'm going to make myself sound older than I probably am, but back then, we didn't have laptop computers that we could hook up and send stories right back. We came back to the office, or we called in and dictated them. We didn't have computers that we did the layouts on. We did them by hand. So, that gives you an idea of how different it was. But for the most part, even early in my career as a newspaper writer, you had a day to work on a story, and you had time to cultivate your sources. And, you'd hear something at the very beginning that maybe was true, maybe wasn't. You had time to find out. You had time to wait for calls to come back. And now, obviously, you don't. If I get a call from an agent that says, this guy signed, here's the money, I need to put that out right away. It might not be 100% accurate right away. And you kind of see journalism happening real time on Twitter, that by the end of the day, you get the full picture of the story, but you need something immediately. So that is really different. And obviously, I also know what my competition has immediately. Instead of, in the early days of my career, I would get up at 8 a.m. I would run to the store, buy 6 or 7 newspapers, read them all. Now I don't need to worry about that. By 8 o'clock at night, I can tell you what's going to be in the Post the next day, and Newsday, and all the rest of it. And if I need to play catch up, I can do that before I go to bed. So it's just more immediate now, more 24-hour now, and it's you don't get the same ability to really practice journalism the way we were taught. It's more, get this as fast as you can, and we'll kind of correct it all on the fly.
Yeah, so Nick and I bring this question up a bunch to other people who have been on the show. How do you teeter the line? How do you balance yourself between getting a piece of news or a scoop out there that is going to do well, that is going to bring eyeballs, not only to your account, but obviously to SNY, or letting that marinate a little bit, and then maybe, I guess, having somebody else jump on that when you kind of had it first? Because, unfortunately, it has become a race now, and it's more important to be accurate than first. But I'm sure there have been times where you've been put in that position. So how have you basically teetered that line?
It's not easy. And the honest truth is, you make a lot of mistakes along the way, because, if you're not getting things out immediately, there's no reason for people to follow you. You can't be, if, Zach Wilson gets hurt in practice, that's probably a bad example, because we all see it live. But if somebody signs a contract extension, Daniel Jones with the Giants signs a contract extension, I can't wait a half hour on that, because by then it's old news, and I will look to people like I'm behind, and not just on Twitter and Facebook, but also anybody that would go to our site. They'd be like, well, why would we come here? You don't even know this news, and it's old news. So there is a bit of a rush sometimes. It makes you put a lot of faith in your sources. You try to remember, who's trustworthy, who's not. If somebody lies to me and I make a mistake because of it, I know to be careful with them next time. It's a little easier to be quick because, back in the day, you'd have to make a phone call and wait for a return call. Now there's text messages and DMs and a million other things, email that you can, get quick answers to. So that certainly helps. But the truth is you make mistakes. And one thing that I've tried to remember, and sometimes my bosses, more so at the Daily News than at SNY, didn't believe in this, but a few years back, I had interviewed at ESPN for a job that I didn't end up taking. And I remember talking to their editor, and he said his philosophy on that was, people in general don't always know who's first. Journalists do, reporters do, we keep score. But in general, the public is out there. Some people are on Twitter every 2 minutes, but in general, the public is, when they can get to their computer, they'll look up something. So the example he used for me was, when Brett Favre retired, I guess the first time, said ESPN didn't have it first. They let, I think Jay Glazer broke the story, and they were fine with that because Fox broke the story wherever Jay Glazer was at the time. And then ESPN had an army of people that within 20 minutes, they had 15 stories up on their website. So people would know, okay, well, Fox got this first, but they would go to the Fox website and they would find nothing. Then they'd go to ESPN and find better coverage. Basically, his motto was, you don't have to be first, you have to be the best. Get the right information, get more of it, get better coverage, and people will come to you. And I try to remember that at, in those moments when I'm really scrambling for something, that's happened 5 minutes ago and I feel like I'm late already.
Yeah, things have certainly changed since your career started back in Niagara Falls.
Yes.
When you got that first gig there with Niagara Gazette, what was the process like for you just to get your foot in the door there? And how did you ultimately end up covering an NFL team in the Bills?
Oh man, I hated that when I worked there, and I came to love it more in hindsight. But when I graduated Syracuse, I had a big ego, and I thought, okay, I'm going to go work for the Daily News and Newsday and get a big job. And it was a bad job market at the time. I think the National had just closed, so they had a lot of guys in New York that were suddenly unemployed, and they just flooded back into the New York papers. There was just nothing to be found. So, a friend of mine saw an advertisement for an internship, so I applied and got it, and I went up there for 10 weeks. And at the end of that, I still didn't have a job, and they offered me a job there, and I said, sure, I'll take it. And in hindsight, the benefit of that was we had 5 people on the sports staff, and they were a half hour outside of Buffalo. So they had to cover the Buffalo Bills. They had to cover the Buffalo Sabres. So I got to do that. And, within a week of being up there, I find myself at Buffalo Bills camp and, looking at national reporters that I had, that was, I graduated in 1991, which was quite a long time ago, but the Buffalo Bills were, beginning really, in the middle there of their they were coming off their first Super Bowl. So they were in the middle of their 4th Super Bowl run. National reporters everywhere that I had, looked up to for years. I was just sort of thrown into it, but it was a great experience. And, it made me more marketable. As much as I couldn't wait to get out of there, couldn't wait to make some money. I was a 22-year-old kid who had covered the NFL for a year. That was pretty helpful in looking for my next few jobs.
Yeah, I think you got lucky there. You
Yeah.
kind of downplay it, but I mean, again, the Sabres were good in the 90s. The Bills had those runs of 4 Super Bowls. So I think the coverage of 2 major professional teams definitely helped you. And you did eventually work your way back downstate.
Yeah.
Well, actually, first you went to the North Jersey Herald, and then obviously went to the Daily News. But so how did that materialize for you? Did you just continue applying for jobs and looking for opportunities and, the available opportunities to jump on to maybe cover the teams down here? And who was instrumental in bringing you back closer to the city?
Well, I was a pest. I bothered sports editors down here constantly. I sort of took the philosophy.
Gotta do it.
Yeah, I took the philosophy of, what's the worst? The worst thing they can do is say no. It can't get any worse than that. So if I got a no from someone or they didn't answer, I'd call them. If they gave me a no, I'd call them a month later. And Ken Pringle was the name of the sports editor at the North Jersey Herald and News. And, he got a couple of hires and brought me down, and he flat out told me, he said, I'm hiring you, so you stop calling me. Which I don't know if it was true or not, but it's like, I'm tired of getting your letters and calls. So now you can work for me, which was great. And again, it was a small paper in Paterson, New Jersey, but I covered the NFL and I did baseball and hockey and, and the NBA when the Knicks were, the Knicks Bulls series of the 90s were great. I got to cover a lot of those. And I always said to tell kids this, said, you don't stop applying for jobs. So, I got down to Paterson, and within a month I'm sending out resumes again. I'm just sort of looking at whatever that next step is. And I lucked into the Daily News a little bit. There was a guy named Barry Mizell who was covering the Giants for them, and he was leaving to get into the sports memorabilia industry, but he wasn't sure it was going to work out. Since it worked out great for him, but he wasn't quite sure it was going to work out, and he wanted to leave the Daily News on good terms. So he wanted to recommend a young up and coming reporter to replace him. And he thankfully recommended me. They brought me in. I didn't get the job, but a few months later they had a job covering the Islanders open up. And, I'd covered not much hockey, but I covered a couple of hockey games. So I was able to dig up some clips and send it. And, thankfully they gave me a shot doing that. So, it was a lot of persistence with resumes and making sure that, they didn't forget about me, that my resume was always on top of the pile, and in the end, making connections. So, when a job opened up, somehow, some way, they had heard my name.
So ultimately, you get the Giants beat. What do you remember about your first few days being the guy covering the Giants for the paper?
Yeah, I'd done hockey for about 4 years, and it pulled me off occasionally to do Giants stuff to help out, especially the Giants went to the Super Bowl in 2000. So I covered a lot of those games and practices. The next year, when they had me on the Giants beat, it was like coming home. I mean, I had done most of what I had done in my career had been football, from the Bills in Niagara Falls to the Giants and Jets for 5 years in North Jersey. I loved covering hockey. It was exhausting, but fun. The guys were great to deal with. My 1 year on the Islanders beat was one of the best years of my career. But football was sort of always where I thought I would land. So, I knew everybody. It was that first week or so. I'm pretty sure we were up in Albany for training camp by then. It was like visiting old friends. I knew everybody. I was happy to be there. And it's like, okay, this is what I wanted. This is where I want to be.
So with the Giants, obviously you covered them, the Super Bowl runs and some great teams, a lot of different personalities. For you, who are some players or coaches that you always felt like, if I speak to this person, maybe they're gonna, I don't want to say be a source, but I would say like maybe like you want to, there's a big loss or a big win, you want to get a quote from somebody. Who would be your go-to people in that sense?
That's an interesting question. There's a good mix in there. Thinking of those, not only the Super Bowl teams, but even the teams preceding it. There were some guys you couldn't miss in the locker room. One guy that jumps out, and I was not a big fan of his, we did not get along, was Jeremy Shocky, because he was such a wild card and so emotional after games. You never knew who he was going to rip, what he was going to say. He was nuts. So he was always the first stop in the locker room. Tiki Barber was another one who was a great speaker, a great, he would analyze what was going on and honest about it, a great quote. So he certainly was a can't miss guy. Michael Strahan was another one, and he was really hot and cold with the media, but when he wanted to talk, when he had something to say, it was great. I mean, the world sees it now with his, daytime talk shows and game shows and everything else.
Same with Tiki.
Yeah, exactly.
His radio show, yeah.
And Tiki, at least when he was with the Giants, was portrayed up until the end as a good guy, a locker room leader, and all this. Michael Strahan wasn't portrayed that way because he, quite frankly, and I've said this to his face, he could be a jerk to the media. But when he talked, there was no better spot to be than in front of his locker. You could get a real honest conversation. Just a great person to get to know. Those are some specific answers, but in general, offensive linemen, the best talkers, the best guys to get a real insight as to what's happening. And back in the old days, assistant coaches, we're really shielded from assistant coaches now, but boy, there was nothing like in those early days covering the Giants when, play would go wrong on the field and you'd get coach speak from the head coach and the players wouldn't tell you what was going on. You could grab the secondary coach in the locker room and he'd be like, here's what happened. He'd almost break it down for you on the pad. We don't get that anymore, which is a real loss, but those guys were great to talk to too.
A lot of personalities there. I'm definitely looking forward to Tiki Barber is going to be on the next season of The Real Housewives of New Jersey on Bravo.
Is that right? I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah, so I don't know if he's married or his girlfriend. She's joining the cast, and they've been filming some stuff with Tiki. So
wow,
I'm looking forward to seeing that. I know my wife's a big fan of the show, so I watch with her, and now I get to see Tiki Barber next season. So
that might be. Well, no, it's not bigger than. I don't know if you guys remember when the Giants had a quarterback, Jesse Palmer, who was the Bachelor.
Yeah.
Which was
I don't know if you heard this story, Ralph, but so I used to work at Bleacher Report with Chris Sims. Chris Sims said they originally offered him the Bachelor.
Really?
John Gruden told him, "Don't you dare do this! I will not play you." And it launched Jesse Palmer's career, who has become very successful off the field. Yeah, that was some wild times. I remember when he was the Bachelor. I was like, the backup quarterback for the Giants is going to be the Bachelor mom.
it was really strange. I don't had to think back. I don't think the Giants were too pleased with that, but I think that Jesse Palmer rightfully realized he did not have much of a future in the NFL, so he needed to take this opportunity. I don't think that he gave the Giants an opportunity to tell him no, but that was an absurd run. I'm not a big fan of. I watched some reality TV, but I certainly wasn't a big fan of The Bachelor. Having to watch every episode and
covering it.
Well, I'm glad that ended.
What are some of your most memorable moments that pop up to you from covering press conferences? I know there's always been some big ones, whether it's just on a weekly basis or introductory or firings. Which ones kind of stick out to you?
Well, a couple of good coach ones. Tom Coughlin, his introductory press conference was as good a press conference as I've ever been at. It was, the Giants, they were a bit of a mess. Jim Fossil had just walked away. There's players kind of. I hate putting this on Jim Fossil. He was a great guy to cover, and he was a better coach than most people give him credit for. But by the end of it, the players were doing whatever they want, showing up whenever they wanted. There was a lot of just not much discipline with the team. And Tom Coughlin came in, and it was like listening to a military general. Just the speech about the honor and dignity of being a Giant, and what it means to him, and what he was going to do, and the discipline he was going to enforce. And by the end of it, I remember when it was over, there was silence, and Pat Hanlon, their great PR guy, kind of hit the wall behind and was like, "Let's go, I'm ready." And he was ready to run through a wall. And I think that most of us listening to him that day were, we're not supposed to get emotionally involved in it, but it was a good fire up speech. It was everything that Tom Coughlin was going to be in those first 3 years. And you could tell, I don't know if this was going to work, but he was in charge. He had a plan, and they were going in the right direction. The complete opposite of that was the Adam Gase press conference.
Oh,
yeah. It's where, I was in favor of that hire. I thought, he was a good offensive mind, and his failures in Miami had a lot to do with injuries and Ryan Tannehill not being a good quarterback, we thought. But boy, listening to him at that press conference and watching his eyes move all around, I started to think, I don't know that this guy's ready for this. And like it or not, being confident and handling the media is just an enormous part of the job, especially in New York. And he looked like he was scared. And that was a really, really bad sign. So, I certainly remember those two. For players, there's been a lot of good ones in the locker room over the years, but the one that always stands out to me is a Jeremy Shocky story. It was after a game in Seattle, and I think we were talking to Luke Pettigrew was their left tackle at the time. And I think Jeremy Shocky had his back to everybody. We're all waiting for him. He didn't want to talk. So we moved the pack over to Luke Pettigrew, and we're just asking him about the game. And Luke gives us some bland, nothing answer. And all of a sudden, Jeremy Shocky turns around and yells, "We got outplayed and we got outcoached. You can write that." And the pack just like moved over him, and he proceeded to rip the team, rip the coaching staff. And Luke the entire time is like grabbing his arm, trying to calm him down, and like, "You got to stop. You guys don't want to talk to him. He's done." And he just kept going on and on. And it was one of the great things about Jeremy Shocky is once he got going, everybody wanted to shut him up, but there was no way to actually do it.
No doubt about it. And back then it was less so with the cameras and stuff and no social media. So it was kind of like you're getting gold and you're going to write that out.
Right. You got time to do it.
Right. Yeah. Now it's like, I'll bring up this conference for you. When you're in the, McAdoo's being introduced and Twitter's going crazy about the guy's suit. Like, are you checking your phone after, like, what the heck is going on here?
Yeah, and then that's the worst part of social media. Like, he obviously looked goofy in the suit, but I'm not a fashion critic. And I remember, I'm looking at Twitter as he's talking. I'm certainly tweeting what he's saying, and I'm seeing stuff on the suit, and I'm thinking it's all right, whatever. It's Twitter having its fun. But eventually, it becomes so big that I've got to write about it, and that's absurd. It's absurd that that's what people care about in this press conference, and I've got more important things to do. And when my boss calls and says we need something on the suit, I'm going to spend my time on this. You want to know what it is and why did he choose it and how come it didn't fit? I don't care. And I've got to call people in the Giants organization and they don't care. It's an absurd cycle when things like that happen. And you do it and you kind of shrug your shoulders, and that's the way the world is. And as my bosses, I'm sure, reminded me that day, news is what people are interested in. So if that's what people are talking about, who are we to say you're wrong? Even though they are, and I want to tell them that. It's, I'm sure I wrote a story that day on the suit. I'm sure I've mentioned it multiple times. Things like that happen all the time. We just had one the other day. I'm sure you guys saw Jason Garrett after a press conference.
Coach.
Right, exactly. He said, whatever, have a good day, guys. And nobody said anything. And he says, the response is, have a good day, coach. And people thought he was saying the Deion Sanders thing, demanding to be called coach. And it went on, and a couple of writers tweeted it. A lot of fans started doing it. It went on. It's not at all what he meant. He was like doing the good morning teacher thing. You say, good morning. I didn't hear you. You're supposed to respond this. He was smiling. He was joking. And by the end of the day, I'm like, I can't just ignore this. Everybody's talking about it. So I ended up, just writing a little something saying that's not what he was doing. And I thought it was obvious, but sometimes you get caught in those things, and, no journalist wants to do it, but welcome to the world, I guess.
Yeah. All right. One last Giants question for you before we transition. Because we've had a few Giants writers on. I always like to ask this question. Where were you, and what do you remember when your editor called you and said, Plaxico Burress shot himself, get to work here?
I remember exactly where I was. It was, I had an infant daughter at the time, and we had a day planned where we were going to go to the zoo. And it was early in the morning, and I always go down to my computer. It was downstairs in our basement at the time. I don't think I had an iPhone to look at to scroll Twitter. So actually, I'm not even sure Twitter was a thing really back then. So I went downstairs, and I remember getting a text message from someone just saying to me, did you hear about Plaxico Burress? And I didn't. And, what did you hear? And they tell me what they heard. So I start, I know my family's upstairs getting ready to go. And let me check into this. I signed onto a fan message board, and somebody had said, I work in the ER of this. Plaxico Burress was in this morning with a gunshot wound. I'm like, oh my God, this can't be. Sometimes things are wrong on those message boards, hard as it is to believe. Sometimes they're just, exaggerated. But, I remember emailing the Pat Hanlon, the PR guy, and he didn't get back to me right away. And that was my clue that, normally he would say, that's ridiculous. It's fine. I knew they were there at the building. He didn't respond. And I went, oh, crap. And eventually he got back, and I think he said to me something like, I'll have news for you in a little while. Like, oh, I can't believe this is actually true. My wife comes downstairs and like, are you ready to go? And I just looked up and I said, Plaxico Burress shot himself. And she's like, all right, see you later. And she leaves. And it actually became a, family joke, as much as it's not a joke situation for years. Like if I got called away to work, she'd just go, Plaxico shot himself. I get it. We'll go, do stuff without you. But yeah, I basically ruined a day at the zoo with my daughter so I could handle that ridiculous story, which then consumed me for months and months after that.
Yeah, I don't know if, and you don't have to say if it's true, but I don't know if anybody on that team ever said anything to you, but I would imagine a lot of people are mad at him because that was a great team and they were maybe looking to go back to back there if that didn't derail them.
I've heard Brandon Jacobs on the record not long after that blame him specifically for them not winning the Super Bowl. I don't know if anybody else has gone on the record. I have no problem telling you a lot of them have gone off the record. They like him. They don't, some of them are friends with him, but in their minds, and in Tom Coughlin has said this too, and that team, that was the better team than 2007. And I don't think it was even close. And in their minds, there is no doubt they win the Super Bowl if he's healthy. And, the emotional, it's not even the not having Plaxico, although that was big. It changed their offense a lot, but the emotional toll it took, and I talked to a lot of them in the months afterwards, the idea that all of a sudden every question they had to answer was about Plaxico Burress. And it wasn't just us, CNN was now in the locker room, and Access Hollywood and news organizations, celebrity organizations, and they're dealing with it every day. At some point, they like to tell you we're focused on football. It's not a distraction. It absolutely was a distraction, and they were just off their game.
Yeah, it would be very interesting to go back, and if we had a time machine, see that healthy Giants team with Plaxico, if that doesn't happen against that Steelers team that made the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Eli and Ben, that would have been really, really something that year. But we're going to move on here. You get brought on by SNY in 2016. So who helped you transition there? And did you have any reservations about doing television at first more often?
No, not at all. By then I had done a lot of TV. The SNY had started Daily News Live. It was a great old show.
Loved it.
It was an amazing show.
It was tremendous back in 2007. And I did a lot of work for them. I did a lot of Giants reporting for them, stand-ups for their other shows as well. So I'd done probably about almost 10 years of television with them before I came on full time. By the time I came on full time, honestly, the Daily News was really deteriorating. They had a round of layoffs where they basically got rid of anybody who was old and expensive, and not necessarily that old or that expensive, but just they sort of lopped off the top tier. And after that happened, I kind of looked around and like, well, I was the next tier. And like, I don't, if they have layoffs again, which the way the newspaper business was going, I'm not going to survive that. So I need an exit plan. I was a good friend with Lauren DeFord, who used to be a producer at SNY. And I said, what can I do to get here? How can I figure this out? And together we came up with this idea that, I would become their Giants reporter. They had an opening at the time. And also, they were just kind of starting up the internet coverage. And I came up with this pitch on why I could come in and write and be like their insider and do all their NFL coverage online. And, maybe someday this can lead to other insiders joining. And, thankfully, Brad Como, Kurt Gowdy, Steve Rabb, they all bought it. They all thought it was a good idea.
You created your own position at SNY.
Essentially, yeah. And I think that, Fred Harner was the guy running the internet at the time there. I think they were thinking about it. I'm not sure they knew exactly how to do it. And I think I gave them the push that they needed to. And, thankfully it worked. And now you see we've got, Andy Martino as our baseball insider, Ian Begley as the NBA insider. We do a ton of coverage online, more so now than they had ever done. I like to think I started all that and certainly had a big hand in the building the ground floor of it. But I'm honestly thankful because not long after I left, the Daily News had that next round of layoffs. They had that big one where they were down to like 5 staffers for a time. I would simply have been out of work. So, they saved me in that regard, which I'll never forget. And I think they built something good, which I love too. And so the transition to me was welcome. And I was still doing writing, still doing some TV. So to me, it wasn't all that much of a change.
Yeah, Daily News Live, tremendous show. Jonas, Joe Bingo, you, Isola, Raceman.
It was great.
It was a great crew. Great,
It was
must see
amazing.
TV. But last season you had a digital show. You, Michelle Margot, the tailgate. Should we be expecting that to come back this season in full force?
Yeah, that'll be back starting September 9th, I think, whatever the Thursday is that opens the NFL season. So we're excited about that. We're just starting to work on our guest lineup now. And yeah, it was, our first year doing it. I think we'd like to think we did a good job. The ratings kind of built up over time, which was nice. And we had a lot of fun. I think the digital shows like that, SNY feels is kind of the future. We end up getting more views sometimes online than we do on regular TV. So, it's starting to establish itself, which I like. And maybe we'll actually do something live this year too, now that there'll actually be some tailgating in the parking lot, which we were missing last year. So, hopefully it'll be even bigger and better than it was before.
Absolutely. For you, obviously, you're the NFL insider. So, was there any issues for you, or like how did you go about getting all those Jet sources or other sources initially when you first came on? Now you got connections with all the teams, but what was that like for you?
It was a little different. I had done some Jets over the years, not a lot, so I knew some of the people there. It took a little while to start building up sources. One of the good things for me, not so much for the Jets, is they had a lot of turnover in my time there. A whole new front office came in, a whole new coaching staff twice came in. So, when that happens, everybody's got to rebuild their sources again. So, I was basically on the same ground floor that everybody else was. That first year was a little tricky. I would miss some inside stuff. Now I like to think I'm pretty much on top of it. But the other thing is, you don't necessarily need team sources. And I think I've got enough around the league where, everybody talks as much as they say they don't like to. They don't want to know anybody to know their business. There are people outside the organization that talk to Joe Douglas, talk to some of his assistants, talk to, whoever, sometimes to Christopher Johnson. Word gets around the league pretty quickly. So I just had to rely on my outside guys more than my inside guys.
So last year, obviously, you're doing all this Zoom stuff. I'd imagine a lot of that's going to be back this year, which makes your job a lot more difficult. But typically, I guess pre the Zoom COVID era, what was your game day routine? Walk us through the game day, what you'd be doing pre-game, during the game, post-game, and really, important question here that I ask everybody who's covering games. What's your go-to meal and snacks during the game in the press box?
During the game in the press box? Well,
pre-game, I know pre-game they have the food, so whenever you're eating.
Yeah. First of all, I think actually this year we're not going to have the Zooms anymore.
Nice.
It looks like we're going to be in person, not in the locker room, but in press conferences, basically. That's as of now. Obviously, the pandemic is still out of control, and they're eyeing that, so that could change. But as of right now, we're in person and just at podiums instead of at people's lockers, which is not great, but better. My game day routine, it really depends on whether I'm at a game or in the studio. Last year, we're still debating where I'm going to be this year, but last year I would go into the studio pretty early in the morning, 9 a.m. There'd be some pre-show, do the Jets pregame shows. There'd be some pre-show meetings. I would go over my script. I do a little news and notes segment on the pregame show. Actually, I should say this was 2 years ago. Last year, obviously, I was doing all this from home. Would get on set, I'd wait for my turn, do my segment, and then go watch a game. And after the game was over, do a little bit on post game, come back, start writing some more. I would usually do after each game some takeaways, just quick off the top head, guys that played well, things I noticed in the game. Then I would wait for the press conferences, see what else was going on, and then write a column. Sometimes I would watch the second game of the day, whatever that was. If the Jets were 1 and the Giants sometimes would be at 4, it would work out perfect, and I would do both games. And then I would hang around the studio until about 10 o'clock, and we would tape sports night. So basically, I was doing football from 9 in the morning till 11 o'clock at night, and just some combination of being on TV or writing. If I was at a game, It would kind of be the same. I would get there early. I would just do my segment from the field, usually with Janae Coakley, our Jets reporter. And then after the game was over, instead of going to my desk and writing, I would actually get in my car, drive to the studio, which is, about 6 miles, and it would take about 2 hours at that time of night on a Sunday, and then write from the studio, do sports night, and then finally head home. So basically kind of the same routine, just depending on where I was. And honestly, as for what I would eat on game day, whatever garbage they served us in the press box, which was never very good, I was always thankful when it was breakfast, because at least then the French toast or eggs were somewhat edible, as opposed to the rubber chicken or hot dogs that they would serve for lunch. So if there was a brunch, I was okay with that. I'd always grab a bagel or something as well. And it was a little bit dicey. I would kind of forget to eat the rest of the day. Sometimes I'd be find myself starving at 10 o'clock at night, and like, I'm gonna have to have my lunch and dinner when I get home, because I'd just be so busy I'd completely forget about it. And I didn't want to stop. The only thing I could stop at was a Burger King right before the Holland Tunnel, and I'd just rather wait until I got home.
So we're going to start wrapping up here. You've been really great. But I wanted to touch on your books for a second. I mentioned them at the top. You got 2 books. You wrote Eli Manning, The Making of a Quarterback, and Gave for Life, Michael Strahan. When you're a writer, doesn't matter what you're writing. You have a passion for it. You have a love for it. A lot of it will always come easy. But I wanted to ask you personally, and you can answer this however you want to. What was the biggest difference in the process writing the books as opposed to what you normally do? Was it finding the time to do interviews? Was it the timing of it and how you had to organize your schedule? Because a lot of people we've had on previously, especially somebody like Gary Myers, was able to walk us through the process of his book writing. So I wanted to ask you that too.
Yeah, there were 2 different books, and actually, I'll let you know. Unfortunately, the Michael Strahan one wasn't ever published, or at least not as of yet. It was part of a series produced by the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and there was some contractual issue that's way over my head, and their hope was to do books on everybody in the Hall of Fame, but they ended the series after 2 books. I did write it and thankfully got paid for it, but it just never actually made it to print as of yet. So hopefully that'll come out at some point. But the process of writing it is much, much different than, what I would normally do for writing stories, much more in depth, which is why I loved it. Stories that in a newspaper article of 600 or 700 words that I could only tell in a small bit, I could now expand to, a full chapter, 10,000 words or whatever I chose it to be. Now, I always wanted to write a book. It was one of my goals from the moment I got into this career, and there were several projects along the way that I did proposals for, didn't work out. When Eli Manning was drafted, I saw an opportunity of just following his career, at some point writing a big book on not only how they found him, how they developed him, who he was, not a biography of him, but just the whole story of how they put everything into this one guy. No matter how he turned out, that was going to be a great story. So I started just saving everything. I mean, every interview I did with him, even if I only used a couple of quotes, I transcribed the whole thing, put it in a file. If I would, go to the scouting combine to talk to people about something else, I always threw in a couple of questions about Eli, saved it, put it in a file. So I knew that at some point I would use all of that. And after that, timing worked out for me. I was pitching the idea around the time, around early 2007. The initial pitch was, believe it or not, that this isn't really working out with Eli Manning. And, they did all this and they're going to end up with nothing. And what a great story that's going to be. And I had some mild interest in it, but obviously that exploded after he, won the Super Bowl. And thankfully I had a lot of things, but, it was still balancing my other job, but I still had to set up, another few dozen interviews with some people I had already talked to, but I wanted more. I remember, you find out things that you just didn't know before. I'm talking to the Giants offensive coordinator just about, I knew what they had thought about Eli in those days when he was struggling, but now that he was relaxed and I could get him for an hour, Kevin Gilbride could tell me what they really thought about Eli, how close they might have been to abandoning him. I remember getting details from the quarterback's coach about drills that I don't even remember seeing in practice that helped develop him along the way. Scouts and other general managers just were more expansive in a relaxed setting when they knew it wasn't going to be a headline in a tabloid newspaper. And the only unfortunate thing for me was because the publisher wanted to capitalize on the Super Bowl, we really had to rush it. And, the Super Bowl was done the first week of February. I think my deadline to have the book entirely written was the first week of May. Wow. So I was, I can write fast, and I had a lot of stuff and I had ideas in my head of how to do it. But by the end of it, I think I checked myself into a hotel for 3 days. So there was no distractions. And I just stayed up, drank coffee, wrote, and finished it, which obviously was different. It was quite a marathon session of writing. But it was, it was great because I loved telling those stories. And the same with, the Michael Strahan book was a little different. I did have a lot of stuff. Getting Michael to sit down for an interview was a bit of a project, but eventually once he did, he was as terrific as usual. But that to me is the biggest difference, is instead of talking to a guy and you've got 5 minutes and you're trying to get to the important points, you can talk to him for longer and get the bigger picture of things, and you just get details that you would think from my years of covering Eli I would have known everything about him. I didn't know anything about him, it turned out, because when people could really sit down and relax and talk, that's when you got the great stories.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are going to be tuning into the Eli Payton Monday Night Football broadcasts, and I don't know, maybe that might get higher views than the regular broadcast. We'll see who the play-by-play guy is.
Yeah, it should be really good.
Ralph, thank you for doing this with us. We really appreciate it. Again, a little difficult finding you and trying to get you pinned down at first, but we did it. The interview was terrific. You're more than fine. We appreciate your time as always. What we do here is we give our guests the last word. So if there's anything else you would like to share, or if there's anything else you would like to promote, Nick and I wish you the best of luck this upcoming season. Thankfully, it's going to be a little more normal. You'll have fans at tailgating. You'll have fans in the stands. So hopefully everything ends up working out and we can get through the season. We're going to be watching you the whole season. We're going to be supporting you. Hopefully we could have you on again. But if there's anything else you would like to share, promote, please go right ahead. Thanks again for doing this with us.
Well, it's my pleasure. I think I'm contractually obligated to promote that everybody should check in on the Giants and Jets coverage at SNY.TV. We do a great job, I think, there of, I know we're a TV station. We're not, the tabloid newspapers. We do a pretty good job of getting you all the news and insight, a lot of great interviews as well. And I hope you'll tune into the tailgate this season too. We got a lot of good things in store. It's a good little show, and it's only going to get better. And I hope more than anything that, I'm not supposed to root. I'm not supposed to tell you who I'm a fan of, but I'm tired of losing. I'd like to see some wins this year. So hopefully for everybody's sake, the Giants and Jets will be a little better than they've been in the last 5 years or so.
Yeah, Ralph, we're looking forward to the coverage, and hopefully there are some live shots of fans at Jets tailgates, and you can see my co-host Joe here going crazy, roasting some hot dogs and whatnot, and getting ready for his Jets big tailgate over here. But we appreciate your time, and that's going to do it here for this episode of I'm Right, for our very special guest, SNY NFL insider Ralph Vacchiano, and for my coach Joe Calabrese. I'm Nick Durst, and this has been I'm Right.